My mother stole my inheritance money. She gave it to my Oppress from high school, who's now her spiritual son. I said, you know, he called me Piggy every day for 4 years. Then my mom looked at me and said, you were fat, sweetie. Get over it. He laughed and said, guess I'm your brother now. 2 days later, my face was on every local gossip page with the headline, Jealous Daughter Freaks Out Over Family Blessing. So wait, you're saying you're giving him the money Dad left for me? My mother didn't even flinch. She sipped her decaf, leaned back into the beige suede sofa, and said calmly, he needs it more than you do. You're doing fine, aren't you? That moment was the prelude to one of the most emotionally destabilizing periods of my life. I'm Deirdre. I'm 38, no kids, divorced, living in a modest apartment in West Ashley, Charleston. My dad passed away 5 years ago, and while he wasn't exactly Jeff Bezos, he'd built a good life through his real estate firm. He made clear, both in conversation and paperwork, that whatever he left behind would be for me. His only child. But grief does strange things to people. After his death, my mother spiraled inward and upward. I don't know how else to describe it. She started going to yoga retreats, meditation weekends, juice cleanses. She threw out the TV, started wearing loose white clothing, and began talking about energies and blockages and how pain holds ancestral wisdom. At first, I thought it was harmless. Weird, but harmless. Then came Dwayne. When she first mentioned she had a healer coming over, I assumed it was another fringe therapist from one of her weird Facebook groups. I stopped by that afternoon with soup I'd made because she was getting over a sinus infection. He opened the door. I swear my knees buckled. It had been nearly 20 years, but I'd know that smirk anywhere. The bleached smile. The smug energy. The little nostril flare when he was about to say something mean. Dwayne Elkins. The guy who used to oink at me from his truck in high school. Who once passed a fake note in English class from a secret admirer that turned out to be a cruel prank. Who called me Piggy so religiously that some of the younger kids actually believed it was my nickname. And here he was. Barefoot. Wearing linen. Saying things like namaste, sister. I wanted to vomit. My mom didn't even acknowledge how strange this was. She introduced him like he was a new boyfriend, but also a mentor, but also a son. I couldn't keep up. He's been helping me through my grief. He's very gifted. He speaks with my spirit guides, she said while casually arranging a bowl of oranges. I laughed. I genuinely thought it was a joke. But it wasn't. Within a month, he had moved into the house. She called it temporary. Said he was going through a rough patch. He was in transition between realms or homes or jobs, it changed depending on when I asked. I watched as she became more and more enthralled. He'd lead breathing sessions in the living room. Rearranged all the furniture for energy flow. Burned sage constantly. Then she told me she was selling the house. I thought she was finally downsizing. That made sense. It was too big for one person, and she hated being alone at night. But then she said she was giving a large portion of the sale to Dwayne. Why? I asked. He's opening a healing retreat outside Asheville. It's his calling. This is what your father would have wanted, he believed in helping people, didn't he? I felt my chest tighten. He also believed in taking care of his family. My mother looked at me like I was a toddler mid-tantrum. You're just angry. You're jealous. And honestly, you're being small, Deirdre. Small? I said. This man tormented me in high school. Do you not remember what he did? He made my life heck. Every single day. He called me Piggy in front of teachers. She actually rolled her eyes. You were fat, sweetie. Get over it. People change. I stood there, stunned. Speechless. Then Dwayne, standing behind her with a cup of turmeric tea, gave me a smirk that made my stomach churn. Guess I'm your brother now, he said. That was the day I left and didn't come back. I tried to reason with her. Wrote letters. Called. Emailed. Even tried talking to her best friend, but apparently, Dwayne had already worked his magic on everyone in her circle. I was the outsider now. The closed-minded, bitter daughter clinging to the past. Then it got worse. 2 days after our confrontation, someone sent me a link to an article in a local gossip blog. There I was, bad lighting, older Facebook pictures of me looking angry, next to the headline, "Jealous daughter freaks out over family blessing." The article made me sound unhinged. Accused me of trying to hamper a sacred bond between a grieving widow and her spiritual guide. Called Dwayne a pillar of emotional healing and painted me as some resentful, toxic child. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Not because of the article, but because of what it meant. My mother didn't just give him money. She gave him my identity, my story, my voice. And now, the narrative out there, the one people were actually reading, was that I was the villain. The bitter daughter. The emotionally stunted woman who couldn't handle her mother finding joy again. Meanwhile, Dwayne was hosting group healing sessions on the beach. There were photos of him on Instagram wearing a crown of leaves, smiling as a circle of women placed their hands on their hearts. His captions were nauseating. Some daughters are reborn as sons of the spirit. When you know, you know. I stayed quiet for about a week. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what to do. What could I say? That my own mother gave away what was supposed to be my future to someone who used to call me a barnyard animal? That she laughed in my face and told me I was fat and to get over it? I didn't want to sound crazy. That's the trick with people like Dwayne. They know how to position themselves as the enlightened ones. Any pushback, and you're just resisting your own healing. So I did the one thing I hadn't done yet. I got organized. I reached out to a former classmate named Latrice. She and I weren't close in high school, but we'd bonded years later at a local networking event for women in business. She now ran a small investigative podcast in the Carolinas, focusing on fraud, exploitation, and cult behavior. It was niche, sure, but thorough. She didn't just believe me. She got angry on my behalf. "Girl," she said, "he used to throw gum in your hair. I remember. He made our lunch periods unbearable. And now he's out here in a tunic taking money from widows? We're doing this." Within 2 weeks, she had compiled a small but damning folder. Dwayne had changed his name legally to DeWera last year. He'd filed as a nonprofit in North Carolina under Spiritual Light Ascension Institute, but had no registered board, no tax transparency, and no license to operate as a counselor or therapist in any state. Better yet, she found 2 other women who had given him large sums of money for healing spaces that mysteriously never opened. One of them, a retired librarian in Asheville, had gone to small claims court over it. But she never showed up to her own hearing. According to her niece, she'd become too embarrassed. That part hit me hard. Because that's what this was built on: shame. Shame and silence. So I agreed to speak out. Latrice put together a special segment and dropped it under her podcast series titled Sacred or Scammed. In it, she interviewed me voice altered, the other 2 women, and even a brief clip from a psychologist specializing in predatory spiritual groups. The episode went live on a Thursday. By Friday, it had over 40,000 plays. That weekend, I got a text from a blocked number: "You really are just a fat little pig, huh? Good luck fixing what you just broke." I stared at the screen for a long time. It was him. Of course it was. But this time, instead of deleting it, I screenshot it. Sent it to Latrice. Sent it to a few legal contacts I'd made during the podcast process. We had what we needed now. We weren't just women with bruised feelings. We were witnesses. Victims. And we had paper trails. While that ball started rolling, I took a mental step back and tried to understand my mother. It hurt to do it. But I wanted to understand how she could be manipulated so completely by someone who had visibly hurt me. Someone I knew she remembered. Someone she had scolded when I came home crying after he glued my gym clothes shut in high school. But then I realized, this wasn't really about Dwayne. This was about loneliness. My dad had been her partner for 41 years. He balanced her. He grounded her. When he died, something shifted in her. She wasn't just sad, she was untethered. Floating. And Dwayne, opportunistic as ever, knew exactly how to speak to that. He gave her the illusion of purpose. He let her feel important again. Chosen. It's the kind of thing people in grief desperately reach for. And once they grab it, they don't want to let go. Even if it means choosing fantasy over family. I wish I could say that realization made me feel better. It didn't. But it did help me understand why she ignored me. Why she let the man who used to humiliate me sleep in the guest room I once cried myself to sleep in. The fallout from the podcast came faster than I expected. A local newspaper picked it up. Then another. Then one of the bigger southern regional outlets wrote a piece on the healer who preyed on grieving women. It included a photo of Dwayne from his LinkedIn days pre-Diwera, smiling in a polo shirt from his short-lived time as a used car salesman. It all started to unravel. But not for my mother. Not yet. She doubled down. Wrote a statement on her Facebook, saying she was deeply disappointed in me. That I was spreading lies about someone who had helped her reclaim her soul. Her post got 5 likes and 1 comment, from her friend Judith, that said, "Sending you light, Marla. Family is complicated." I cried for an hour. And then I got up. Wiped my face. And started packing. That same month, I sold off some stocks I'd been sitting on and rented a storefront in Savannah. It was a dream my dad and I had talked about for years, a used bookstore with a little cafe inside. I named it the Dog-Eared Page. People thought I was crazy. But I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming something. And when the first customer walked in and asked for a recommendation for a book about women surviving betrayal, I didn't hesitate. I didn't hear from my mother for a while after she posted her Facebook manifesto. A few mutual acquaintances reached out, mostly awkward and vague. The kind of messages that say a lot without saying anything. I hope you're doing okay. I saw what your mom posted, just thinking of you. But no one really asked for my side of the story. Because when it comes to family drama, people prefer their narratives tidy. The grieving widow and the bitter daughter was easier to process than the truth, which was messy and sad and didn't leave anyone blameless. Meanwhile, the Dog-Eared Page slowly started becoming the exact kind of place I needed for myself. Warm. Safe. Honest. It wasn't flashy. I kept the furniture secondhand and the coffee strong. Local authors did readings on Thursdays. I had a shelf in the back labeled Books for Broken Hearts and another called Strong Women Who Didn't Forgive Anyone. That one got the most traffic. I didn't set out to make it into a community, but that's what it became. Women came in alone and ended up staying for hours, sometimes talking to me, sometimes just sitting by the window flipping through a book while their tea went cold. One day, a woman around my mother's age wandered in, picked up a memoir about surviving an emotionally manipulative marriage, and said, "I think I was supposed to find this." That moment stuck with me. Because the truth is, there are so many of us out there. Women who are tired of being polite about pain. Women who've been gaslit into silence. Who were told they were too sensitive or too angry or holding a grudge. Who were punished, not for lying, but for telling the truth too loudly. That's what this whole experience had done to me. It forced me to tell the truth out loud. Even when it hurt. Even when nobody clapped. About 4 months after the podcast aired, the walls started to cave in on Dwayne. Latrice kept me updated. Apparently, some of his donations were being investigated as potential fraud. One woman had given him money under the impression he'd invested in a healing retreat. Turns out he'd spent most of it on a Tesla and a week at a luxury resort in Tulum. Another woman, early 60s, divorced, had emptied her retirement savings for him. He told her the stars had aligned for her awakening and that material wealth was blocking her root chakra. Her daughter filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office. And still, somehow, my mother kept defending him. Even when the podcast got syndicated on a national platform. Even when journalists reached out for comment. Even when they showed photos of his new place in Arizona, bought in cash. Even then, she insisted it was a smear campaign by people who don't understand love. I'd stopped trying to reason with her by then. She wasn't reachable. Not to me. But apparently, she was to someone else. One rainy afternoon in February, I was closing up shop early because the pipes under the espresso machine had burst and my barista called out sick. I was tired, crabby, and covered in coffee grounds when I saw her. Standing in the back aisle. Holding a copy of the Four Agreements. She looked thinner. Her hair was different, shorter, grayer. Her posture wasn't quite so rigid. She looked like someone who'd been left out in the wind too long. I didn't say anything at first. Neither did she. She put the book down, slowly walked toward the register, and then paused in front of the display of books about forgiveness. Her hand hovered over one, then fell back to her side. I didn't know this was your place, she finally said, I's not meeting mine. I stayed quiet. Waited. It's beautiful, she added. Your father would have liked it. That's when the silence cracked a little. I turned to face her fully, arms crossed, not angry, just waiting. I was wrong, she said after a long pause. I mean, I was deeply wrong. About everything. About him. About you. Her voice sounded brittle. Like something sharp was pushing behind every word. I didn't know how lonely I was. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. When your father died, I felt like I had no shape anymore. And Dwayne, he gave me structure. Or the illusion of it. And I let it poison me. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to throw her out. Instead, I just stood there. She nodded slowly, like she didn't expect anything more. You don't have to forgive me. I'm not here for that. I just needed to see you. And to say it out loud. Then she turned and walked toward the door. She paused again with her hand on the knob and added softly, he's gone, you know. Took the last of my money. Told me I was holding him back from his final transformation. And then, barely above a whisper, you were right. She left without buying anything. I stood there for a long time. Didn't cry. Didn't rage. Just stood. It didn't feel like closure. It didn't feel like peace. But it felt like something I didn't have before, a moment of truth, unadorned, not manipulated. Not spiritualized. Just raw and real. That moment, more than anything, reminded me why I survived all this. Because the truth, when spoken plainly and without apology, can be more healing than any incense-burning chakra chant ever could. After she left the store that day, I didn't talk about it. Not with friends. Not with the few regulars who knew bits and pieces. Not even with Latrice, who'd been my battle buddy through all of it. I just let the moment sit. Like wet clothes you leave on the line a little too long, not ruined, but heavy. Musty with things unsaid. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even relief. It was just strange. Surreal. This was the woman who once cut me off mid-sentence to tell me that Dwayne's aura was purer than mine. Who laughed when I brought up the time he pantsed me during homecoming week. And now here she was, standing in the soft yellow glow of my bookstore, looking like a collapsed umbrella, telling me I was right. But the thing no one tells you about being right is that it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't rewind the clock. It doesn't rebuild what someone else burned. It just leaves you holding a truth that's too heavy to carry and too painful to drop. After that visit, I started seeing her in town more often. Not deliberately, just the kind of passive collisions that happen in a small southern city. At the grocery store near the marsh. Once, at a Sunday farmer's market, standing stiffly by a booth selling beeswax candles. She didn't approach me. Just nodded slightly, like someone acknowledging a former coworker they'd had an affair with in another life. Sometimes she'd walk by the store. Not often, but enough for me to wonder if it was on purpose. She never came in again, though. And I never invited her. I wanted to. God, I did. But that's the other thing about betrayal from your own blood, it turns love into landmines. You want to walk toward it, but your body keeps flinching from the blast that already happened. Meanwhile, the fallout for Dwayne kept unraveling like a bad sweater. Latrice kept sending updates. He was last seen in Sedona, Arizona, trying to launch something called the Spiral Center for Earth Renewal. Different name, same scam. But this time, women were speaking up faster. Sharing screenshots. Organizing. Warning others. I heard from one of his earlier victims, Dolores, the librarian from Asheville. She wrote me a letter, in actual pen, on lined yellow paper. She said my interview on the podcast gave her back her dignity. That hearing someone else say out loud what she'd been afraid to admit even to her own family made her feel less foolish. Less alone. She said she started gardening again. Joined a grief group. Told her niece the whole story. That letter stayed on my fridge for months. It reminded me that truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits there quietly, healing the wounds no one claps for. The bookstore became its own kind of sanctuary. Not a spiritual one. Not the performative kind, with singing bowls or faux Buddhist decor. Just a place where people came to remember who they were before someone tried to rewrite them. I started keeping a private journal behind the counter. Not for venting, just observations. Little pieces of dialogue I overheard. Things people confessed in the safety of bookshelves. One entry read, March 14th. Woman in red scarf picked up a grief memoir, flipped to the end, said aloud, God, I wish I'd had this in 2009. She didn't buy it. Just sat with it. Then left. Another, April 6th. Older man asked if we had any books on letting go of resentment. I pointed to 3. He bought none. Asked if I had coffee. I gave him one for free. He left a 20. There's something deeply sacred in the quiet stories. The ones no one tweets about. About 8 months after my mom's visit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened. It was her. She sounded tired. She said she was starting therapy. Not chakra therapy. Real therapy. With a woman named Lorraine who doesn't tolerate spiritual bypassing. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I looked it up later and cried when I read the definition. It means using spiritual ideas to avoid dealing with difficult feelings. If that wasn't my mother's autobiography, I don't know what was. She didn't ask me for anything in the message. Didn't beg. Didn't deflect. Just said she'd been thinking a lot. About me. About Dad. About what she let happen. Then she paused. I don't expect anything. I just needed to say that. Out loud. And she hung up. I didn't call back right away. I didn't even save the number. But I listened to that voicemail more than once. Not because it changed anything. Not because it fixed the years of erasure. But because for the first time in a long time, I heard my mother as she really was. Not the version Dwayne wrapped in mysticism. Not the cold woman who sided with the Oppress. Just her. Tired. Fractured. Maybe trying. And that mattered. Even if it didn't mean anything yet. Life didn't hand me a clean resolution after that voicemail. There was no grand apology dinner, no hugging it out moment under soft lighting. My mother didn't come back into my life with fresh-baked banana bread and tears of remorse. That's the thing about real life, closure isn't handed to you. You craft it, piece by jagged piece. But life did give me an opportunity one never expected. It came in the form of a community event, a healing arts and conscious living expo that was being hosted at a hotel just outside Charleston. Someone left a flyer at my bookstore. I rolled my eyes at first, until I saw who the keynote speaker was. Dewara, channeling inner earth energy for outer abundance. I stared at the page for a long time. The man had vanished from the public eye nearly a year ago. But here he was, slinking back in, rebranded again. This time with promises of vibrational currency and sacred wealth alignment. And just like that, I knew what I had to do. I made a few calls. Latrice was immediately in. So were two of the women who'd been conned by him before, Dolores, and a woman named Brenna who had since started her own online group for survivors of spiritual grifters. We didn't want to destroy the event. That wasn't the point. We weren't looking for chaos. We wanted accountability. I bought a ticket. So did Latrice. We attended separately. I wore a muted gray dress, no makeup, glasses, looking nothing like the woman from the gossip piece a year ago. The room was mostly middle-aged women. Soft music played, incense burned, and people buzzed with nervous anticipation. When Dwayne walked in, he looked different. More gaunt. Less polished. But still radiating that same oily confidence, the charisma of someone who's gotten used to people never questioning him. He launched into a talk about soul abundance and cutting cords with ancestral judgment. It was all recycled garbage. But the room ate it up. Until the Q&A. Latrice stood up first. Calm. Poised. How do you respond to the fraud claims from last year? The podcast? The women who say you took their money under false pretenses? He paused. Smiled tightly. There will always be doubters when you live in alignment. Pain speaks loudly when it hasn't been healed. Murmurs. Then Brenna stood up. I gave you $26,000. You told me my father's spirit said I needed to purge material wealth. You said I was blocking his reincarnation with my attachment. Dwayne's face twitched. Sister, your path is still unfolding. No, she said. My path's crystal clear. You lied to vulnerable people. You weaponized grief. More murmurs. Some uncomfortable shifting in seats. And then, my turn. I raised my hand. He saw me. Our eyes locked for the first time in over a year. Recognition flickered. Then panic. I stepped forward slowly, keeping my voice even. I'm Deirdre. You might remember me. You called me Piggy every day from 9th to 12th grade. You bullied me relentlessly. Humiliated me. And then, decades later, convinced my grieving mother to give you almost $200,000. Gasps. Someone in the back dropped a pen. I watched you take her grief and mold it into a cult of personality. I watched you strip her of logic, of family, of money. You didn't heal her. You hollowed her out. He stammered something about transformation and misaligned perspectives. But this time, the crowd wasn't nodding. They were quiet. Listening. I'm not here to scream, I said. I'm not here to fight. I just want the truth on the record. So that the next woman, hurting, lonely, looking for meaning, knows what you really are. And what you're capable of. Then Latrice pulled out her phone and said, loud enough for the room to hear, this entire session is being streamed live to over 80,000 subscribers. You could almost hear the energy shift. People started whispering. Some got up. A woman near the front folded her program and left the room. Another one took out her phone, searching his name. Dwayne tried to carry on. But it was too late. The illusion cracked. His words had no magic anymore. The power had shifted. And he knew it. Within a week, the event's organizer issued a public statement cutting ties with him. The video Latrice uploaded got picked up by a few media outlets. Another 3 women came forward, new victims. One had paid for a divine retreat that was supposed to happen in Costa Rica but never materialized. Another gave him a loan after he claimed to be the reincarnation of her deceased brother. He fled again. But it didn't matter. The mask was off. His name now showed up in connection with fraud, manipulation, spiritual exploitation. He could rebrand all he wanted, but Google doesn't forget. And neither do the women he hurt. As for my mother, we're not best friends. We're not even close. But she did something that mattered. She joined the survivor group Brenna started. Quietly. No fanfare. Just logged in one day under her real name and started participating. Not preaching. Not correcting. Just listening. Eventually, she came by the store again. This time, with a small envelope. Inside was a letter. Her handwriting, shaky but still hers. She apologized. Not just in words, but with accountability. She listed what she missed. What she chose to ignore. She acknowledged the things she said to me, called them cruel. Not misunderstood. Cruel. There was also a check inside. Not the full amount, she didn't have it anymore, but it was a symbolic sum. A gesture of ownership. I cried in the back room for 20 minutes. I didn't cash the check. I framed it. It hangs on the wall behind the counter. Next to a quote from Toni Morrison, "Anything dead coming back to life hurts." That's what this whole journey was. Not revenge by fire or fury. But slow, steady reclamation. Of voice. Of truth. Of self. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest revenge of all.